I want to welcome everybody today to this session. My name is Kelly Garner. I'm the moderator of this session. I am Associate Professor of and Coordinator of Commercial Music, and actually just started being the Director of the Graduate Program in Music Technology at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee. Our title today is Look Good, Be Nice, Work Hard, ? Identifying Success Paths for Women in Entertainment. I have some very esteemed colleagues with me today. I would like to start introducing those with a lady that was a former colleague of mine while I was teaching at Belmont University, Miss Cheryl Carr, Cheryl S. Carr. And she is Associate Dean of the Curb College of Entertainment and Music Business. She's an author, Associate Professor of Music Business. She writes and speaks for many things, is author of several books, lots of different things that she has done. Harvard Law School, recognized by National Business Journal, is a Woman of Influence and Women in Music City awardee. So we're glad to have Cheryl here with us. I would also like to introduce another one of my esteemed colleagues, Miss Beverly Keel. She is the Dean of MTSU's College of Media and Entertainment and is a music industry activist who works for gender and racial equality in the music industry. She was recently named National Change Agent by Billboard for her efforts with Nashville Music Equality, which she co-founded in 2020 to create an anti-racist environment in the Nashville music industry. Is an award-winning music journalist, has worked with People, Parade, In Style, New York, Rolling Stone, The Tennessee, and so many other publications. She has been at MTSU in the recording industry department since 1995. The third colleague that I would like to recognize is Miss Amanda Marie Martinez, and she is a doctoral candidate in the history department at UCLA. And she is completing, interestingly enough, a dissertation on the history of race and the country music industry. She's about to be a fellow, I thought this was interesting, Amanda, a fellow in the Department of Recording Industry at Middle Tennessee State University. So as you can see, we have several ladies here who are going to help us discuss this topic today. It's a very important topic. So I want to get right to it. We've kind of divided this up, folks, for just to talk about different things. This title, and I have to give Cheryl credit for this title because we all kind of kicked it around a little bit, and then she sent me an email and it was brilliant. And I said, yes, we've got to go there. Look good, be nice, and work hard. I love that question mark because as women in the industry, right, we've experienced all of those things. So we've divided those up a little bit. Amanda, we're going to let you take off with that look good part. Could you help us with that topic?
Sure, and thanks for having me. And good morning or good afternoon to everyone wherever you are. Yeah, I mean, this issue of look good, I mean, in the double standards facing women, I first want to start out by saying, I mean, as someone who doesn't technically work in the music industry, who just studies the history of it, these issues facing women are not in a vacuum, right? I mean, these issues face women at every level of society, not just in the music industry, but everywhere. But certainly women are held to a double standard when it comes to their appearance, which opens you up to all sorts of criticisms. One example I thought of, is just women in politics, where it's like if you're seen as being too rigid or too over-prepared, which was an issue for, Hillary Clinton with the 2016 election. She was constantly criticized for how she looked, whereas, some of her colleagues like Bernie Sanders might have all crazy hair, but he was, celebrated for it. Certainly there's that double standard that women have to face where you're just kind of going to be criticized, whether you over prepare and look good or, if you don't, then you're going to be seen as a slob, which men don't have to face that kind of double standard. Secondly, if you, it could open you up to certain issues of sexual harassment if you kind of look too good, which of course opens you up to issues where, you might be seen as seeking that kind of attention. So I think that it's just an overall double standard across the board. Personally, as someone in academics, when it comes to personal appearance, I feel like this manifests in teaching and in how you conduct yourself in the classroom. But this could go for any kind of public engagement, public speaking, where women are often held to a double standard when it comes to how they carry themselves, which could go along with the appearance. Again, being seen as too rigid or not friendly enough. So again, it opens you up to, you're kind of going to be criticized no matter what. So those are just a few of the things when it comes to looking good. I don't know if we want to open up to some of the other topics, and then maybe we can kind of converge on how these all kind of cross over.
Beverly, also in those thoughts, looking good, but being nice. Can you speak to that?
Well, we had a little get together yesterday to talk about the panel, and then I remembered an article in a website called Saving Country Music about Maren Morris that really triggered a lot of women. And I wrote something about it at the time. And let me just read it, and then we'll go from there. So it said on Saving Country Music, and let me say something else about Maren Morris. She thinks she's all that. She ain't all that at all. And you can apply that to mean whatever you wish. Maren Morris conducts herself like she's an absolute superstar and hot shit, and she's not. I'm sorry. There's no humility or even dignity. And this article really created an outcry on social media from women in the music industry. It just triggered something, which was, the message to women is clear. Know your place. Stay where you belong. Don't you dare venture out beyond where we want you to remain. Talk about a double standard. We celebrate men who have swagger, from Adam Levine to Mick Jagger to Waylon Jennings. Can you ever recall a man being criticized for being confident? No, but a woman is either nice or a bitch. Those are sort of your two areas. So I can't tell you the times people have probably said behind my back, who does she think she is? Doesn't she know her place? So, I was thinking about an O Magazine interview I read with Oprah Winfrey, Reese Witherspoon, and Mindy Kaling, and they talked about the double standard that exists. As Mindy noted, the word ambitious is a negative adjective when applied to a woman, but a compliment when applied to a man. And as Oprah says, when women own their space and their talents, they're perceived as being too full of themselves. As Reese said, how NBA players are always talking about how great they are. Why don't women talk about how great they are all the time? LeBron James isn't like, oh, no, not me. He's like, I'm LeBron James. So, we go beyond to make people think that we're nice and approachable and that we haven't changed. We have to go that extra mile to prove that we don't think we're all that. I know I've done that. About 10 years ago, I took a leave of absence to be a senior vice president at Universal Music Group. And there, I really was almost uncomfortable putting my title on my emails because I didn't want it to look like I was bragging, and I would answer every call myself as opposed to having my assistant answer it. I got to the point where I realized I was almost doing a disservice to my job by not assuming the position. And I remember I came back to MTSU, and one night, Professor John Merchant arranged for Barry Gibb to come in, and we had a dinner beforehand at our Center for Popular Music. And I and I was interviewing Barry in an hour, and I should have been prepping for that interview in front of 800 people, but instead I was cutting pie and serving it to people and clearing plates because I didn't want to look like I was above that. And I know at college events, like if press is there or alumni there, I would look around the room to see if there was somebody standing alone who wasn't talking to somebody. I would engage them and introduce them to other people, and the men weren't doing that. So, as Amanda said, you can look at how female politicians or female artists are perceived versus male artists. And that, of course, has a trickle-down effect into our everyday lives. So there's a double standard, and we have to be perceived as nice or we're a bitch. Those are the only two options. And I hope it changes as part of this. If you think about African-American women who have just the greatest challenges, whatever white women face, African-American women face it tenfold or 100-fold. And there is, Michelle Obama had to deal with an angry Black woman. And you remember the famous New Yorker cover with, I think it was Barack and Michelle Obama in like military gear. So if we disagree with something, we're angry and we're hysterical. Where, men are just stating their case. So there's definitely a double standard, and I hope that goes away soon.
Cheryl, you want to jump in on that conversation and continue that?
Yeah, those are all such on-point insights. And I'd like to expand on them and talk a little bit about how race intersects with the two things that both Amanda and Beverly have shared. I'd like to share a few PowerPoints and would like to share my screen if I may.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
So I started doing some research really 2 years ago, and Dean Keel was a part of my focus groups for this research on Music Row. And I'm not going to talk about that that research, except to say that an aspect of that study was to look at not only women executives in Nashville in general, not just on Music Row, because we know Music Row itself has changed to be much broader than the specific geographics that it represented, but that women of color music industry executives really got my attention, in part because I'm a Black woman, and that's just a natural curiosity for me, but also because as I began to do a little bit of digging here, I wasn't finding much with respect to Black women on Music Row in the music industry. So I broadened that out. And so today I just want to mention a little bit about this idea of intersectionality, which Beverly mentioned just a moment ago when she said that whatever white women are experiencing, Black women are experiencing something additional. And so we have research that says the same thing. And Kimberly Crenshaw is an attorney, a legal scholar, who has coined the term intersectionality. This first bullet is really my definition. It's not hers. It's just me putting it into real simple language, which is that when multiple types of oppression are experienced by the same person, that's the intersection of one oppression with another type of oppression, that's intersectionality. And she created that term specifically in the context of Black women based on a court case that she was involved in, and saw that the Black woman at issue didn't have a case because the employer, at least that's the way that the court saw it, because the employer had hired Black men and white women. And so any inequities that were being experienced by Black women were being dismissed because the employer was looked at as being responsive, because, hey, I must be okay with Black folks because I got Black men. I must be okay with white folks with women because I've got white women. So that was dismissive. And she saw something there. It was a gap in understanding that layered experience And from there, she coined this term. But what she has identified is now she's a center director and really looks at this very closely. But one of the things that we're seeing today outside the music industry is a real focus on, for example, the killing of Black men by police officers. She has created this research, and I'm going to call it a movement called Say Her Name, which looks at how that's happening with Black women, that a lot of people don't really understand that there are a lot of Black women who are being affected by that as well. So that's just an example of how it looks. If you haven't seen her TED Talk, Kimberly Crenshaw's TED Talk on intersectionality, it's a game changer, y'all. Check it out if you haven't checked it out. Okay, so intersectionality, and then this myth of meritocracy, which is this idea that if you just work hard enough, which is the third focus for our panel discussion today, is working hard. If you just work hard enough in the United States, the land of opportunity, the land of the free and the home of the brave, you can have the American dream. And so this is it's not accurate. And what the research is saying is that, well, it depends on who you are in terms of how that works. And so it's reminiscent of this Alice Cooper lyric, I can't get a car because I ain't got a job. I can't get a job because I ain't got a car. So working hard doesn't really help me if I can't get a job to work hard, because there are other inequities in society at play that impact how I show up in the workplace. And so in the music industry, here's a list. This is a nice, robust list, right, of Black women executives in the music industry. It's a decent sized list, you know, sort of, depending on how you look at it. And we might be inclined to say, yeah, look at Black women. Go Black women, you're doing great. Look at all the progress that you've made. Look at the positions, the titles that these women hold. I mean, these are influential positions within the music industry. This comes from a 2019 issue of Billboard. And there are other women. This is certainly not a complete list. And there are some women in our very own Nashville, for those of us who are in Nashville. It's a real short list in Nashville, but yes, there are Black women. And so this idea of just work hard and you'll get there, one might argue that these women are evidence of the fact that that meritocracy philosophy really can work. These women have made it. And I want to just focus on one of them who's at the top of this list. She really is at the top of this list in many ways, not just positionally, but Sylvia Rhone. So just taking her as an example. So she ascended to this chairperson CEO role in 1994, became the first woman and only African-American woman to do that. 10 years later, she's in a chief executive position at Universal Motown. And then in 2019, she was recently named chairwoman of Epic Records. This is huge, right? These are really huge accomplishments. And even having received those accomplishments, which could come to you because you know your stuff and you do work hard and you have this history of having done that, you could still have some interesting experiences. And so she talks about this experience that she had with Motley Crue, who did this. They spewed these racial and sexist epithets at her publicly from the stage, calling her some, I'll let you fill in the blanks as to what words go there. But I think you know what words go there. And so, hey, she rose to her role and she dropped them, you know, from the label. That was in 1994. But the idea that if you work hard, that those racist, sexist experiences somehow go away, it's just not accurate. And she is an example of I think, a really good example in the music industry. And I will bet you if I interviewed all of those women, they'd all have stories that are similar to this, or they might have stories that are similar to this, that working hard is not the only issue when it comes to racism and sexism. And so she's just talking about here how she's naming it as racial and gender bias. If anybody's wondering how not that those particular words leave much to the imagination, but if you're wondering, she's calling that racial and gender bias and saying, yes, she definitely experienced that. And no one need be under any illusions or assumptions about whether by virtue of her position that she was somehow exempt from racism. She wasn't and isn't. And I would say none of us is exempt from that. And she has advice, working hard, it's not a non-issue. You should work hard. And she would say that's not a non-issue, or that you somehow, because you are Black or because you're a woman, that someone should make some special allowance for you that doesn't involve working hard. The point is that hard work coexists with sexism and racism and creates challenges that not everybody has to deal with.
So my next question is, ladies, how do we fix this? I mean, what's the next step? I think that ideas, how do we move forward fixing this? I mean, I don't think we do it in a day, do we? I think we have to figure out ways. I will tell you that in my own experience, as I have seen that happen to me, I have had to tell myself, you know what, just do what you do well. Just keep working. Just ignore. I mean, I hate to say it, but sometimes you have to say to yourself, just ignore it and just move forward, right? So talk about how do we fix this, ideas, and things you've heard each other say and that resonated with you.
Well, I think the people who have some power, whether you're a tenured professor or a department chair or above, you must speak out when you see something wrong. For instance, in university settings, there is a tendency to make the female faculty member a secretary in a committee. Women have to start saying no, because you'll often find at university settings, professors do all of the departmental or college work, because the men aren't stepping up to do it, or women feel obligated, or women don't know how to say no. Meanwhile, the men don't do I'll just call it the departmental housekeeping, if you will. And they just focus on their research. So we need women to do that as well. Learn how to say no. We need white men to be allies. It's wrong. Another one of my pet peeves is that men don't get woke until they have a daughter. So it's okay that other women are held down, but not their daughters. But the people in charge have to change it, and some of it is just what we're used to, and so we have to be ready to step outside our comfort zones. We need men to realize they're not losing something by giving women their due. You can look around on Music Row. Cheryl, correct me on this, but I don't believe there's ever been a female run to be the head of a major label in Nashville, ever.
Correct.
At MTSU, I'm the first female dean. I was the first female department chair of recording industry. So I know today Joe Rogan, the comic, was saying, it's the white men can't speak their minds anymore. That's not true. White men still have all the power. And, you've got to address the belief that white men can't get jobs anymore, because if you look around, they still have all the jobs. So you just have to correct misperceptions and stereotypes, and you have to be bold and speak out. And as a woman, you're going to be labeled a bitch. I know that once I was doing movie reviews on WKDF, which is a rock station, and I made a joke about men, and somebody called in and said, "Who does that bitch think she is?" The next week, I made a joke about, it was self-deprecating. And I said something like, well, if I want to see someone self-destruct, I can look into a mirror. Well, nobody had problems with that. So they're okay with females putting themselves down. And that's a lot of times what females use humor. They put themselves down. They share the credit with others. So, we got to quit doing that.
I'll jump in here too, just building on what Cheryl, all her great PowerPoints, is just to, all be aware of our different positionalities, and we all come from different walks of life, whether, that's our race or gender or class, whether we've experienced different types of abuse, just trying to be easy on each other. And also when it comes to race, especially, just to kind of, be cognizant of, politics and representation. I think it's easy for people to say, look at that list that Cheryl put up of those Black women in those positions of power and say, there's not a race problem because look at these women here. But if you were to put that list up against all the white men executives, it would not compare. And I think that, we see this issue with country music where historically people have said, oh, country music doesn't have a race problem because Charlie Pride. But he is literally the only one who has been a Black country music star long term, and then you bringing in the intersectionality framework, there have been no Black women on top of that. So just being cognizant of our positionalities and not rushing to say, hey, there's not a problem here because there's one person here, or we have, for instance, a vice president who is not only a woman, but is Indian American and African American. That doesn't obscure the fact that, or that doesn't mean that racism is fixed on every level and sexism is fixed because you have this one individual in a position of power. So I think just acknowledging that these are systemic inequalities that permeate every level of society, and just because one person might make it, doesn't mean that everything is fixed. That I think so often as a society we're focused on individuals rather than collective systemic forces, right? So just because one person has gained a certain level of success doesn't mean that it's accessible for that sort of individual across the board. So I think just thinking about positionality and being weary of jumping to conclusions would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. We have some questions coming in. I'm going to go ahead and jump there. A question for Dr. Carr. As a white teacher of mostly Black students, what advice can you give me on navigating the line between teaching professionalism and whitewashing my students and their culture?
So, and I would say that Beverly and Amanda may have thoughts about this as well, and maybe from a different perspective. So I would say the idea of whitewashing, so how are you defining that? I'm going to define it since I don't have a definition from the question. I'm just going to go ahead and define it. Presumably that means not recognizing the contributions of people of color, retelling stories that erase other cultures. And so, I think some of that requires understanding a fuller history. I've begun to really do a lot more research into the history of the entertainment industry, and that wasn't really something that I was doing. I'm a copyright lawyer and intellectual property attorney. I haven't been an expert in race matters in the entertainment industry, right? But I have become more interested in that. And so I would say first, do the same research that I'm doing. so that you have some substantial content to offer to your students, I think you will find that history compelling. And I think that you will want to share the whole story. It's not a pretty picture in some places. And so I think a part of that is, owning that. But you can say things. Take your privilege, and I know that's a controversial word, this idea of privilege, but we all have privileges. I have some privileges. I have 3 college degrees and a job, and so I have privilege. Everybody has privilege. And so take the privilege that you have and use that as a foundation for being able to say things to your white students that maybe I couldn't say in the same way, that we could both be saying the same thing and your white students might perceive it more positively coming from you. As a member, there's not any one white community, just like there's not any one Black community, but they might perceive that as, oh, let me hear, because it's not coming from some Black person complaining about racism again, So that's privilege that might be powerful for you. Own it and walk into that.
Great. We have a couple more really important questions. Are there generational differences, particularly when it comes to dress and appearance, that contributes to the problem? Is the new generation entering the industry more inclusive than their bosses? Anybody want to speak to that?
I would say yes. Yes to all those questions. So, something I've learned during the last year has been how largely American culture equates with white culture. So it's white people who were dictating the professional, what's considered professional dress or corporate dress, how they should act, that sort of thing. So, my mother's generation is very different from my generation, which is very different from my son's generation. And, but also my mother's generation educated me, and I educate my son's generation. So some of those common threads are going to be there. I was thinking back to the last question, and my thought would be, if you're educating students of color, you teach them the same things you would teach your white kids about how to go on a job interview, meaning you don't ask them to deny their culture. You just give them tips like, if it's banking, you dress one way. If it's in the music industry, you can be more creative. You might want to cover up your tattoos, but don't ask them to hide who they are as people. I know once at MTSU, we had a department chair who had dreadlocks, and someone advised him to cut them off. And that's just a white cultural thing. And I said, don't cut those off. So it's getting better, but we're certainly nowhere near where we need to be. We're not even halfway where we need to be, but it is getting better. And I think we're getting more multicultural in everything, from our advertising to what we see in the media. To 20 years ago, we didn't have as many African American anchors on Good Morning America as we do today. So there's better representation. And I think it's just going to take time. And I know this was an inarticulate answer to that. I'm just sort of rambling.
I think it's great. It's organic. That's what we were hoping for. I'm going to throw another question at you guys. And we can just keep talking if something comes up. Do you find that human resources policies in the industry are robust enough to protect women who report intimidation or harassment from retaliation? This is a place where I see a need for great change. Who wants to hit that?
Well, I can jump in and say no. And also, I had a former student come to me in the last month where she had some issues, and she consulted an attorney, and the attorney said, well, unfortunately, the management company you work for is too small to have to adhere to these things. And even if the HR can help you, you're labeled a troublemaker. And it used to be, well, if you filed a lawsuit in the music industry for sexual harassment, you better get a lot of money because no one will ever hire you again. So we tend, as a society, until recently, we've protected the aggressors and not the victims.
Could I
So, yeah, Amanda.
I just had a quick response to the last question about gender and generational differences. I had a couple thoughts on that, which is just that I'm hopeful that things are changing with this younger generation. I think that there's greater awareness happening that, gender is a construct. Humans didn't come to this earth with ideas of, oh, this is a woman and a woman dresses like this, and, this is how they conduct themselves. That this younger generation is starting to see that these are constructs, and that, in fact, gender is something that's very fluid. And we're seeing this with the use of gender pronouns now, where people might identify as, as they, where they, might not identify with these kind of traditional standards of femininity. They might be more across the board. So when it comes to gender, I think that I'm hopeful that things are kind of opening up where we're not holding ourselves to such rigid standards. So I just wanted to chime in with that real quick.
I'm going to chime in with that one too, and just say I'm also hopeful that successive generations will be more open-minded, less sexist, racist, ableist. But I got to say that I will say in my experience, I'm teaching a class called Diversity in the Film Industry. I have taught that class, and it's a raw class, meaning that it is, it opens the opportunity to confront your own biases through film and seeing how the film industry deals with societal biases. And I'm not seeing that much of a change in attitudes. I think the fact that, we could have both racism and sexism in 2021, and it's not new, right? It's part of the history of our country, suggests that it's something that gets passed down, actually. And the systems haven't, we haven't had a revolution of any kind. Where the systems have been pretty constant too. So we have seen incremental changes for individuals, but we haven't necessarily seen big wholesale changes for systems. And I think and those systems include church, family, schools, and this is where many of these narratives come from. So there's work to do. I'm hopeful, but I want to be clear in my own thinking about this and responding to that kind of question to say, it's not accurate to me to say that, racism goes away or sexism goes away, because we have a new generation, and it was all those old people that were racist and sexist and ableist, and everybody young is over it. And that's just not what is suggested by reality.
Yeah. To go off what Cheryl said, because I am a historian, and one of my favorite quotes about studying history is that everything has changed, but it's different, right? So where racism and sexism persist, and, there might be ways where it looks like we're making progress sometimes, but in reality, it's just evolved, right? I mean, racism today doesn't look like racism 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, but it's evolved and it manifests in different ways. And, you know, there are different types of racism, there's different types of sexism, whether they're explicit, you know, using a racial slur, or systemic. You know, today it's often systemic that where these things manifest, and it doesn't, you know, unfortunately on the ground, it doesn't lead to different results, right? So I think that that's a really important point, that just because we're seeing some things that look like progress, it doesn't mean that everything is suddenly fixed now. I think historically speaking, it probably has just evolved, unfortunately. But I think awareness is the first step, you know, for us to just acknowledge all of these realities and think about how we can change things.
Right. Here is a comment. It's not necessarily a question from the audience. Often people think ousting the good old boy mentality mentioned in the quote on the slides is a matter of a new generation taking over, but that is not enough. It is systemic and cemented by industry practices, processes, and power structures. Oh, I could talk about that. Couldn't you, some of you ladies? I think we have to keep fighting against it, right? Go toe to toe. That's one of the things I've found personally, is I have to be afraid not to go toe to toe with some of those things. Just because I'm a woman, I still have to stand up. Any thoughts?
So it's about getting more voices at the table, because that's where you bring about real change, because they are expanding their areas. So right now, it has been in the music industry, they hire who they know. Well, they only know other white people. They only know other men. So if you make a concerted effort to cast your net wider, to bring equally qualified, but people with different skill sets and backgrounds to the table, first of all, it's going to strengthen your company. And then it will eventually change things. But you've got to have women and people of color in decision-making power to start changing the system. Now, I will say in the year since we started National Music Equality, the awareness is starting to change. I'm hearing from people on a weekly basis, we have a job opening and we would really like to consider some people of color. Can you help us find them? So at least they're aware of how their thinking has been limited, how their experiences have been limited, and they want to broaden those. So it's a step in the right direction, but we have so far to go. But you have to take that first step. And the first step is awareness and education.
Yeah, I have another comment here that kind of goes along with that. Change needs to happen on all levels. As educators, we have an opportunity to research, shine light on, and reveal practices that protect the systems in place that make it harder for women, LGBT, and BIPOC professionals to thrive in the industry.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. When you asked the question, Kelly, about solutions, what can we do? I was thinking about solutions within higher education, solutions within the entertainment industry, societal solutions, and then individual solutions. What can I do as an individual? What can we pursue, more broadly? And I wholeheartedly believe with that commenter that as higher education scholar teachers, we have the opportunity to change some of these narratives with our own research and with our own pedagogies, the way that we teach, as well as expanding our networks. We do the same thing that the entertainment industry does in terms of hiring. We hire adjuncts that we know, we hire other professors that we know who do look like us. And within the entertainment industry, hiring is a huge thing. I'm happy to hear Beverly talk about what's happening with the Music Equality Initiative. Some new business models, being open to some new business models that come from different folks who look at things differently. Sometimes when you have to be really resourceful, if people don't hire you, you go start your own record company, you come up with your own ways of making money and getting the word out there. And then new narratives overall. One thing I want to say in terms of that other question that was just asked about good old boy networks is that in truth, women have not fully evolved in our perspectives either. We are all products of systems that tell us things. And just because I'm Black or just because I'm a woman, it doesn't mean that I'm not constantly hearing things, watching things, reading things, being taught things that say, this is what you should aspire to do. This is how you should act. This is how you should look. This is who you should be, regardless of who you are. We are all, it's like a disease that infects all of us. Mm-hmm. And so as women, we have sexist attitudes too. As women, we have racist attitudes too. This is not a conversation or a dialogue that is about attacking white men. There are power structures where white men are often the folks who have that control and that influence. But everybody in this American economy, social system is infected with the history that is our history. You can't escape it. And so for any of us who thinks that we're not racist, yep, because we're anything, because we're a woman, because we're Black, and Black people can be racist too. And I know this is a controversial thing to say. There are Black people who would disagree with me, right? I do think it's very helpful to have a book like Ibram Kendi's, mm-hmm, where he talks about and gets criticism for talking about his own experience with racism as a Black person who can be racist and could own his own racism. It's parcel of our culture.
Cheryl, so we've got about a minute, I think. Can y'all, in about 20 seconds or less, Amanda, you want to give a wrap up of some things you can think that could give us some change?
Well, I think what I'm hearing from a lot of us is just the first step is awareness, right? Is just acknowledging,
Oh, they're saying, hold on, said we can do 10 more minutes. Oh.
I actually have to, something I have right
bug out. You got to bug out here in a minute. Okay. Cheryl, do you have any more thoughts on where you were going there?
Well, I think Amanda had something she was wanting to get out.
You want to tell us something, Amanda? You got some wrap up?
It was just mainly the awareness. History is, I think, as a society, we have really short-term memory, or there's just not much of an awareness of history. So learning that, these issues that we have, they didn't come from nowhere. And, we study the past to understand the present. So I think just awareness and learning history is just the first step to acknowledge these problems, to understand where they came from.
That's wonderful. There's a couple more questions here, and they told us 10 more minutes, so I'm going to take it because I think we're on a roll. Okay. Here's a question. And Amanda, if you have to leave, that's fine. Is the woke awareness of racial inequality true desire to change, or companies trying to fit into the current environment that blew up nationally after the death of George Floyd and the social justice protests that happened last summer?
Well, I will say, even if you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, you're still doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Even if they're doing it because it's a good business decision, as long as things change and we make progress.
Change agent, right?
I hope that would. I hope that would be the case.
But we want them at some point to do it for the right reasons, right?
Right. But as long as you're doing, if you help somebody out, does it matter if you're doing it because it makes you look like a hero or because you were raised to help out others? Either way, you're helping them out. So I think, some people are doing it. They truly want to be part of the solution, and other think that they have to do it to survive in a business world or to continue their job. So that is a question you'd have to look inside people's hearts.
Right. But at least they're doing it, right?
But they're doing the right thing. They're doing the right thing, right?
Okay, a couple more questions. I'm gonna throw them out because it might spur somebody. Let me see. Let's see. Here's another one. I'm reading a book called Me and White Supremacy now. I wonder if hosting a book club with this on campus in the fall. I'm wondering, any good book or literature suggestions from you guys? Blogs to follow as educators or to share with the students?
So I think Belmont is offering lots of book clubs. And some of the books, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi is one. The Color of Compromise, because we are a Christian mission university. The Color of Compromise is another. It's about the complicity of Sexism. White Fragility is another, by Beverly D'Angelo, and which is written by a white woman talking to other white people, I think primarily. I mean, I own it and I'm reading it too, but I think it's primarily its audience is other white people, which I think, personally, I think it's a good read if you are white and interested in this whole kit and caboodle. And then here's a practical one called Race Talk. And that's about how to talk about race. And race is more difficult to talk about than gender. And those of you who are out there have heard me say this before, because that's what the research says. And we know that that's true, just a practical matter. It makes us all uncomfortable. Some people are comfortable saying the word black or saying the word white, right? In the presence of someone who is that and you're not that. So it talks about how to have these conversations. There's lots of good books out there. But kudos for doing the work and, for trying to find those books. I would just say one other thing, that in reading these books, it depends on how, what's the lens that you take to reading it. Are you reading it as an academic exercise, or are you reading it to see what change you might be able to be part of? And it's kind of like reading anything else. You can read the Bible as a book of history, or for some of us, it's more than a book of history. It's how we live our personal lives. Two very different things. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to take on this kind of reading, I would suggest that ask yourself that question: why am I doing this? Is it more than just an academic exercise?
Here's another comment that I will mention. If companies truly are trying to make a difference, then they must get involved politically. Music industry stood by and watched as state of Tennessee passed a law prohibiting the teaching of critical race theory in school. Industry has been silent. Thoughts on that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, any other wrap up, Beverly? Have any wrap up from you and anybody else if you've got any other thoughts? I believe we've got about 4 minutes.
I would say the change begins with you internally. So the first thing you have to do is educate yourself. As Cheryl said, we are all have racist or sexist thoughts in our head, whether, our parents instilled in them or the media instilled in them. So the first thing is we have to correct our own vision, perception, and thoughts. And then we can worry about others. But be the change that we know we all need for your students, for fellow faculty members, and for the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And my one thought would be just two things, because we've talked a lot. So just two things to take away. One is own your discomfort. with all of this. Just own it and then overcome it, which means accept that this has been an uncomfortable history, and therefore your discomfort has a normality about it. It's normal. It doesn't mean that we need to sit in the discomfort, but it is normal to feel that way, so that you can move out of it in the ways that Beverly has talked about. And the second would be, what does it mean to be an ally? And I would say one little thing that you can do in terms of being an ally without all the big definitions of allyship is when you see someone who is a woman or of color doing something significant, publicly acknowledge it. Publicly acknowledge it. That is allyship that means something.
And that's stepping up to the table and actually having a voice, right? It's like being willing to do something. I love that comment. Amanda, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just add just on the books. You know, I don't know what reading level this is. If this is at a college level or you know, something, you know, high school or anything. But you know, just history books, especially emphasizing you know, marginalized voices, I think is very important. When it comes to how we talk about racism and sexism, I think oftentimes a logical problem when it's so much more than that, right? It's racism and sexism is not like it's a personal choice. Oftentimes you hear people talk about racism as hate, but it's so much more complex than that. It's so much more systemic. It's not just about someone, you know, personally choosing to not like someone, whether they're, you know, black or white or brown or you know, a man or a woman. These are very deep systemic inequalities that, you know, in learning history, especially focusing on marginalized stories of the past, that we can see that how we got here. So I think just thinking and understanding that these inequalities are not just psychological, but deeply, deeply systemic. And we can gauge that through learning history.
Well, folks, we have run out of time, but I want to let's thank our guests today, Beverly Keel, Cheryl Carr, Amanda Martinez, and I'm Kelly Garner. Thank you guys so much for the wonderful discussion that we've had, and let's just forge ahead, girls and women of color, and for sexism, racism, whatever it is that we're fighting, let's just go for it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kelly.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.